Sharon Palmer is a California-based registered dietitian nutritionist with more than 18 years of experience in the field of plant-based nutrition and sustainability. And she recently completed her Master of Science in Sustainable Food Systems. Sharon has authored over 1,000 articles for a variety of publications, including Better Homes and Gardens, Oprah Magazine, and LA Times. And she's written 2 books, The Plant-Powered Diet, A Lifelong Eating Plan for Achieving Optimal Health, and Plant Powered for Life, Eating Your Way to Lasting Health with 52 Simple Steps and 125 Delicious Recipes. Sharon is currently working on a 3rd book to be published this year, and until recently was organizing sustainability tours, traveling locally and nationally and internationally to learn about and enjoy various cultural foods, and also visiting rescued animal farm sanctuaries around the world. So thanks for taking the time today, Sharon. And I'm interested in starting by hearing about your personal journey to veganism. How did that happen for you?
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be with you talking about this. So, I kind of come from a family that ate a plant-based diet. My parents were both mostly vegetarians. I was raised mostly vegetarian. So my parents, for religious and moral beliefs, tried to avoid eating meat, but they were never 100% vegetarian, but it was always something that was part of my growing up. And then on top of that, I went to school at Loma Linda University. I don't know if you've heard of Loma Linda,
Mm.
but they have a really amazing nutrition program, but it's 100% plant-based. The entire community is plant-based. So the hospital, the supermarkets, the cafeteria, all of it is plant-based. And this was way back when, they were so far ahead of their time. In fact, that's now known as the blue zones. I don't know if you're familiar with the blue zones. So now Loma Linda is the one blue zone in the United States.
That's right. I've listened to various doctors. I think Dr. Neil Barnard has spoken about, they've done studies of longevity and health related issues. And Loma Linda is a shining example of what a plant-based diet can do.
Exactly. Dan Buettner, he was a National Geographic journalist. He was on assignment to find locations around the world where people lived the longest. They had the highest number of centenarians. So in the United States, the place he found in all of the United States was Loma Linda, California. And this was the home of the university that I studied in. It's also a population of Seventh-day Adventists who believe in plant-based eating and healthy eating. So there has been a lot. Sanjay Gupta's done some coverage there in the community. So there's a lot on the plant-based diet. So this is where I study nutrition. So it's kind of been part of my background for years. I was always eating pretty much some sort of a plant-based diet my whole life. And then when I started really writing my first books, I had been a vegetarian for quite a while. When I started doing the research for my books, which that was in 2011, I thought, you know what, how can I really understand veganism unless I just try it myself? So I did a 1-month challenge, and I thought, it's not really that hard. I feel amazing, and it's like I have the lightest footprint on the planet. So going from vegetarian to vegan, I can literally say I'm doing my best for people, the planet, myself. And I've just never looked back. So that's kind of how I came to the plant-based world.
That's cool. And then when you studied at Loma Linda, was the curriculum supportive of a plant-based approach to nutrition?
Yes.
Yeah.
So the nutrition curriculum is very specific to plant-based. So, and when you're studying, like how to manage diabetes or heart disease, it's all through a plant-based diet. And this was way back, I studied nutrition. My undergrad was a long time ago. And so this was way before we know what we know now. The research has really soared in the last 3 decades. And in the last 10 years, it's just amazing how much research we have. But back then, there wasn't as much research, and it was controversial in the nutrition world. People thought if you ate a vegetarian or vegan diet, you were going to have nutrition deficiencies. So we know so much more now. So they were way ahead of their time.
That's awesome. And I know now, a lot of people are looking towards plants for the simple reason that the slaughterhouses are closing. which is a blessing in some ways for those of us who have been concerned about the, all the things you mentioned, and the plight of the animals, of 64, 70 million billion land animals every year. It's a staggering number. And for really no reason. There's no reason for them to die for us. And so now people are sort of being forced into a situation of having to look more closely at plants. So I'd like to kind of speak to that, for those people who are suddenly, they've never really imagined a world without animal protein. Where do you suggest they start?
I know it's interesting what's going on now, because there are a few things with COVID that people have started eating more plants, because in a lot of areas we're seeing food shortages. So when you go to your supermarket in your community, and if you're not eating a plant-based diet, the meat section could be already gone. So we're seeing these reports of that being gone, and then people are attracted to things like beans and lentils because they have a long shelf storage, they're inexpensive. People are going through really tough times now in terms of their economic situation. So if you've lost your job and you don't have income and you're concerned, pulses, beans, lentils have always been the least expensive protein source. So there's all these things going on, and now you have the meat processing plants shutting down, which kind of highlights how this is part of our food system now, and how it's a fragile part of our food system, and that we can really be getting all these nutrients we need can come from the soil in the form of plants. So it's really brought up more of an awareness. I'm seeing more people interested in a plant-based diet that might not have ever been, because of some of these issues.
Mhm. So starting with pulses, which are the legumes and the beans, and I know they're the most nutrient rich in terms of protein, I think, of the plant species. And generally, I hear that eating a variety of those is a good thing. Do you think it's better to, first of all, I know you sing the praises of pulses as well, so maybe you can tell us why you're such a fan of the bean family, and also, is it better to buy canned or dried beans, and how do we process those?
Yeah, pulses are a super nutritious food. They're a primary source of protein on a plant-based diet, and humans used to rely on them, since the beginning of time. It was a source of protein for us. I mean, most cultural diets around the world have some sort of a pulse, whether it's chickpeas in the Middle East or black beans in Central America. These were a huge part of our diets. And when you look at the Three Sisters, which was the agricultural tradition in the Americas, where they would plant maize, corn, beans, and squash together. That was this three system approach to agriculture, and it was the backbone of their diets. And of course, they had other things that were supplementing, but we've really gone away from these traditions, and I'm glad to see people coming back to them, because they are so nutritious, high in protein, high in fiber, and then all these other nutrients like minerals and vitamins, and even phytochemicals, which have antioxidant action. So they can really take the place of protein. And, I recommend having at least a serving a day, if not two or three. But I mean, if you're eating 100% plant-based diet, they should be a big star of your diet. So you can get them in their dried form, which means that they're basically very low environmental footprint. They're the most environmentally friendly protein source. So really, they just grow in the field. They don't need a lot of water. They create their own fertilizer they can fix nitrogen in the air and put it in the soil. And then the farmers, a lot of them just let them sun dry in the field. So it's such a natural process. And then they're harvested and put in a bag. So you can see why they're eco-friendly. Or you can get the canned beans where they've been cooked in the can. They're both fine. One might have a little more sodium. You might like the taste if you cook them yourself, but they're both fine. I use both sources. I like to make my own beans, but I always have canned ones on hand. And this also includes things like lentils. Now, lentils you do not have to soak, because a lot of times that's a challenge, because with dried beans, you have to soak them the night before and then There is a quick soaking method where you can just bring them to a simmer, boil for an hour, and then let them soak a couple of hours and then cook. But lentils, you don't have to do that. They're quick cooking. So these are really great. They're shelf stable, and they can really be an important part of your diet.
And there's some talk of lectin. So apparently, if you eat raw pulses, then you're going to get poisoned. But I can't even imagine how a person would eat raw beans. But that's sort of being put out there as that beans actually are poisonous. Don't eat them. But as long as we're soaking them and cooking them, then that gets rid of the lectins. Is that right?
Exactly right. There's a lot of misinformation about lectins. And in fact, if you want to go to my blog at sharonpalmer.com and Google lectins, I've written a couple of good articles there. In terms of lectins, it's been posted that they're that they're inflammatory and toxic. And you're exactly right. When they're eaten raw, they can't have these qualities. But they're destroyed during cooking. So this is something that is really important to know. We know that humans know you're not supposed to eat raw beans. That's why we've been cooking them. They figured that out a long time ago, that you need to cook these things. So if you soak them in water, discard the water, and cook them thoroughly, then you have no problem. And I always like to remind people that look at all the people that eat more pulses. Research consistently shows they're healthier. They have lower risks of all these conditions: heart disease, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, cancer. So it just doesn't make sense to avoid them for that reason.
Mm-hmm. You know what I do sometimes is I'll cook, I soak the beans overnight, as you say, and then discard that water and then rinse them. Sometimes I'll even leave them to sprout. Is that a beneficial thing to do, nutrition
Yeah, there's
wise?
some research. Yeah, there's some research on sprouting, and what we're talking about is just germination. There's People get confused between the terms for sprouting. So you'll see sprouted beans, and you can do grains as well. And what we're talking about is where you barely germinate and just barely let a little bit of the emerging kind of growth come out, a little bit of a tail come out. So that's just germinating. And yeah, so when you germinate or sprout pulses, and you can even do this with grains, you're basically letting the young plant just start its growth, and it can change the nutrition profile of the bean or the grain. It can make it more digestible. It can change the nutritional profile. So I think it's a really healthy habit if you would like to do that, especially if you notice some issues, digestion issues or whatever with beans. And so we're not talking about completely sprouting the entire bean, so all that's left is the big green stalk. We're talking about just barely germinating the bean. And I do have a whole set of instructions and tips how to do that on my blog if anybody's interested.
Your website is really wonderful. There is so much great information there, and it's just so accessible. It's really a beautiful website for sure.
Thank you.
Okay, so just one more thing about that then. Sometimes, because as you mentioned, sometimes we're in the habit of, what am I going to have for dinner tonight? And we open the fridge, and if the beans aren't soaked and cooked, it's a bit of a hassle. So another thing that I do is I soak them, I discard the water, I rinse them a lot, I cook them really well, and then I freeze them. And then I've got, in the morning, I can just take out a container of beans. Do I lose any nutritional value doing that?
No, you don't. That's a great idea. I love that idea because, if you cook a whole pound of beans, it makes a lot of beans. And if you don't have a large family that, and that you're feeding, it can, be pretty monotonous eating the same food. So I like to do the same thing, is create one big batch and then maybe put some in some little individual glass containers in the freezer. So I think that's a great idea.
All right, awesome. So the other thing you can do is grow our own beans, I guess, and then the wonder of that is that every year you can save your own seeds as well and plant them again. I noticed that when I went to your website, it offered me an opportunity to sign up for something about how to start a veggie garden. Can you talk about that? What's that about?
Yeah, well, I'm really passionate about not only plant-based nutrition, but sustainability. And I just got my master's in sustainable food system, as we were, as you know. And this is something that I'm trying to help people with, because growing your own food could be the most sustainable thing that you do in your lifetime. I mean, talk about local food. When you grow it yourself in your own backyard, it's like you're cutting out food miles, food packaging. Can you even imagine, the impacts that you save? Plus, I think you have this connection with the earth. We even have research on all of the benefits of home gardening. It makes you happier. You're getting exercise, you're getting a little vitamin D, and you're getting healthier food. So I'm trying to do whatever I can. So I offer this free toolkit for beginners, or maybe people who just want to learn more about home gardening, like how you could get started, how you could make a raised bed, and how you pick your seeds at the beginning, and all those things. I'm trying to encourage more people, even if you just have a balcony. If you don't have a garden, a yard, if you have a balcony, you could start a smaller container, a raised bed or something, and try to use some of that space you have in your garden, in your yard, if you do have that, for planting some food. This is something that we used to always do in our culture. In America, we would have these backyard kitchen gardens. That's what everybody did a couple of generations ago, and we've lost our way from that.
And yeah, I have a balcony, and I find one of the best things to grow are potatoes, because I can just sprout a potato in my cupboard. The potatoes, they get old and they start to sprout, and then I throw that in a pot, and when it starts to grow. So you plant it about a third of the way, I've learned, with soil and just plant it in there. And then as it starts to grow, the green starts to come up, and then I just put more soil on it, until finally I have this beautiful plant, and it's easy to care for it. And then when the green stuff dies, I know the potatoes are ready, and that seems a really simple thing to grow on a balcony. Um, yeah, and I think a lot of people now are doing gardening. It seems like a lot of people are self-isolating and doing gardening. So as you mentioned, beans make their own fertilizer, so that's a good thing for the soil. How about composting? Where do we get soil? Did they talk about composting in the course you took?
Yes, I'm a huge fan of composting. I would love to see everybody compost. Even if you don't have a vegetable garden, which I hope you will, you can use it, throughout your property. But basically, you're returning those lost nutrients from scraps to the soil, instead of letting it go to a landfill and create methane, which is a greenhouse gas. So basically, any food scrap, except for you shouldn't have animal products in your compost, but any plant material can be put in your compost. And basically, I bought one of these compost, a big black bin that rotates. It has a handle. It was very inexpensive. I've had it for years because it actually has a handle. I can turn it. And then I have another large compost pile going on, because we kind of live in the country, so I have some space. So basically, everything is going in that pile. And I just let it kind of mature. I let it decompose, and then I use that as fertilizer all over my garden, everything that I'm growing. And that is returning nutrition to the soil, because all of our plants and our soil needs that nutrition back. And taking care of the soil is a really important part. I mean, the soil can sequester carbon. We have this deep relationship with the soil, so we have to take better care of it.
Yeah, there's really no need for all the chemical fertilizers. And so would you say that you're a veganic gardener, that everything you do is vegan in your
It
garden?
is. I mean,
Okay.
I'm a home gardener, but everything I put in my garden, which I just recently moved to Ojai, California, which is a very agricultural area. So I'm starting my new garden. I just did one raised bed, and we have a little orchard. So we'll be making more raised beds, and I have an herb garden But everything I do is organic. I don't even use organic. There are some organic allowed pesticides and fertilizers. I don't use those. I create my own compost. And so I'm working on my soil right now. I did have to put in some organic soil in my raised bed to start with, and that's completely fine. So I would say that I'm in that camp because the fertility of the soil is coming from my compost, which not only kitchen scraps, but if you have any clippings, a good healthy compost is a mix of a lot of different things. Some browns, like some dead leaves, some little twigs, those kind of things. The greens, kitchen scraps, all of that stuff can provide a lot of nutrition to the soil that way.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Yeah, it's amazing what we can do just in a small space, how much food you can grow, and it's wonderfully nutritious and inexpensive. And okay, so back to the people now who are switching over, experimenting with a plant-based diet, and maybe they're starting to feel healthy because they're eating lots of protein directly from the plants rather than having it processed through the animals and getting all the extra the fatty acids and stuff that clog up the arteries. So aside from lentils and beans, what else should they be reaching for in their grocery shop?
So another thing, we already talked about all the pulses, lentils, dried peas, beans, canned or dried. The other thing I like to recommend is nuts and seeds, and I'm seeing those now. There has been some shortages of peanut butter. We love our peanut butter, and peanut butter is actually a legume. It's very rich in protein, but a lot of people kind of put it in the nut category because nutritionally and within the cuisine category of nuts. But this is another great source of protein, and it's shelf stable, can last a long time. I mean, the nuts can go rancid. They don't last as long as the pulses because the nuts do have fat, so they can go a little bit more rancid. I like to store my nuts in the freezer just so they last longer. But peanut butter is really a great thing to be using, especially right now because it's that shelf stable. One container can add a lot of nutrition to your meals and your diet. And you can use it, of course, in sandwiches, but I like to use it in sauces. I use it in my veggie burgers. I make homemade veggie burgers and nut loaves and lentil patties, and I add peanut butter. And then baking, it's really great in baking too.
And so for people who are maybe allergic to peanut butter, there's other nut butters that are just as good.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So if you're allergic to peanut butter, there are other nut butters like almond butter. Sometimes you might be allergic to tree nuts. So almond butter might be causing issues for you. But typically, people wouldn't be allergic to something like sunflower seed butter. So the seeds, nuts and seeds, I kind of lump them together. So we have seeds like even tahini, which is sesame seed butter. So these are very nutritious, high in protein. So I definitely recommend I always have at least, I would say 4 or 5 nut or seed butters in my pantry. And, there's probably every day that is going into some recipe or some meal of mine. And I just like to switch it up, have different flavor profiles for my mood or my recipes or my cooking.
Okay, and all right, and so now onto the veggie portion. I've heard it said that that a rainbow of colors, the more colors, the more variety of nutrients we're getting. Is that correct?
Yes. And, we really need to be talking more about the diversity of our diets. This is really a message that's not been talked about a lot. So we always say variety, but really it's about diversity. I mean, humans used to eat from this huge, diverse group of foods, plant foods. And now if you go to the supermarket, you see so many smaller varieties, particularly now, but even before the coronavirus, you would see one type of carrot, and a lot of ingredients and packages are coming from like corn, soy, and these are perfectly healthy foods, but we could choose from so many more. So having more diversity in your diet, more variety, more color means that that you're really expanding those nutrients, because every food has a different nutrient profile, in particular the phytochemicals, these compounds in plants that give antioxidant protection. So the more diversity, the more vibrant amount of different types of nutrients you have in your diet.
And are there farmers markets happening where you live? I know they're shifting and changing, but hopefully we can support our local farmers as much as possible.
Yes, I'm a huge advocate of supporting your local farms, especially now. This is really showing, our pandemic is showing the fragility of our food system. So in my particular region, this is an agricultural area, very known for its small organic farms, a very beautiful farmers market. And a lot of the little farms are producing for high-end restaurants in Los Angeles because their produce is so beautiful and amazing. So all of a sudden that food down, and so it's been difficult connecting all the dots in the food chain. We're seeing that farmers are plowing over their fields. I don't know if you've noticed, you've probably seen that in the news, where some of the crops have actually been tilled over because the farmers couldn't figure out how to get it to people, which is awful. But so in my area, our farmers market was shut down for 2 weeks while they figured out how to deal with social distancing. And now that's on track. So we're getting, the food to people. And I've talked to a lot of the local farmers, and they've been able to get their food to people. They're not throwing it away. So that makes me feel good.
Yeah, I wonder about that. There's a similar situation in Canada with apparently we bring a lot of migrant workers that I think maybe a lot of Canadians didn't realize that. And I wonder about that. I guess one of the reasons that they bring migrant workers is because they can pay them less. They're non-union. It's very exploitative from my understanding. And I'm wondering if maybe now is also a good time to look at that, and how much do we respect the local farmers, the organic plant-based farmers? Are they getting the same kind of subsidies as the big meat and dairy farmers? And how can we make it more appealing for people to want to become, a farm worker? Um, is that something that's being talked about where you are?
Yeah, there's a lot of concern in California where I am. We grow a huge percentage of our nation's produce in California, and we've always relied on migrant workers. There's simply no other workforce. We have no other workforce who's going to do all the farm work, and they're skilled. Now, California has passed many progressive laws for taking care of our farm workers. I believe we have the most progressive laws in terms of caring for farm worker rights as a state. So that makes me feel good. But I'm really concerned about what COVID's going to do to the migrant farm workers, for this particular season. I think this is a talking point right now, because right now is when farmers are getting their crops ready for the big harvest. This is the time that you're planting for that summer harvest. It's going to feed the nation. So it's a big concern. And I think that it's really important for us to support all of our farms. As I mentioned, I'm a big advocate for local food, and I think your farmers market is the easiest way for you to connect with your local farmers. Either that or a CSA, which is community supported agriculture, where you connect with a farmer and you buy a portion of their harvest. It's usually in the form of a box, maybe once a week. And you're literally supporting a farmer in your region, which shows when we see all of these issues with food shortages, when you can have a farmer down the street who's growing healthy food, that is what food security looks like, rather than depending on this huge, massive distribution chain that could be disrupted. At least down the street, somebody's growing something. And literally, when our farmers markets were shut down for 2 weeks, I literally found a farmer in my community, and he let us come to his farm and buy food. So that's really we have to keep supporting our people that grow the food. It's a hard job. It's not a high paying job, and but it's one of the most important things people can do.
Absolutely. You'd be amazed at how much California produce we have in British Columbia as well. We really depend a lot on the food supply chain. And when they closed the borders to the U.S., they maintained the food supply, which is great because it's very seasonal here. Also, we've sort of come to depend on food from Mexico and California, I think, to more of an extent than people maybe realized. And and now, I mean, California is also dealing with drought and fires, and so there's never been a better time to just let you guys sustain yourselves, and we got to learn how to sustain ourselves as well. And another thing, I remember when I was a kid, and I lived in northern Alberta, where I think summer lasts for 2 weeks or so, like very short summers, not 2 weeks, but not very long. We have many months of winter, and we never had all these sort of, or exotic, what are considered now, I guess, exotic foods in the winter. We ate a lot of root vegetables that we had harvested from our own crops. And, the idea of having mangoes and kiwis, and we have so much. I mean, and we survived. Certainly it wasn't as enjoyable as it is now, but something in me thinks that we need to sort of reconnect with the seasonal foods. And as you say, like, if you have a relationship with a farmer, you're just going to be eating what's in season right now. And this seems like another shift that maybe we need to be thinking about making.
I agree with you 100%. I'm always trying to get people more connected to the seasons. We don't even know what they are anymore because our supermarkets don't reflect what's in season, because literally the reason you're getting those things out of season, the reason you're getting all of this produce in the middle of snowy winter in your town, is because it's being produced from somewhere else and shipped in. And our the average miles that food takes to get to your plate is 1,500 miles. So it's one of the things, we could do about living and eating a more sustainable diet is eating more seasonally. And that again goes back to farmers markets, because it's hard to really see what's in season at your supermarket. I'm not saying that you should never go to a supermarket, of course, but by buying more seasonal produce, growing it yourself, going to the farmers market. For example, in my farmers market right now, we have the peas are coming in, the rutabagas, not rutabagas, kohlrabi, the tender greens, the herbs, root vegetables are still radishes and beets. It's still too early to see the summer produce. So pretty soon we'll start seeing, as the weather warms up, we'll see the squashes and peppers and eggplant. But right now you can't find those because they're not in season. So it's following those seasons, but you'll find greater variety, like the kohlrabi. You hardly ever see that in a supermarket, but you see the variety of all of these different things that grow in the different seasons. And it really, it shortens your food miles. Also, the food is more nutritious because it's not traveling so far. We know that when food is picked at an immature state and travels, it loses nutrition. So by going to supporting the farmer's market, a lot of times they're harvesting food that same day. You just can't compare to that. Or growing it yourself is really the only other way. So
All
it's
right.
important.
Yeah, it is. And I think it reconnects us somehow if we're eating the seasonal foods in our region. Somehow that it feels like a stronger connection to the earth. And I think the earth wants us to revisit our connection. So we've got the legumes, and we've got the veggies, and we've got the nuts and seeds. I guess spices are gonna make the difference here. What do you suggest as far as flavoring all of these foods?
Yeah, I'm a big fan of spices. And this is one thing that's shelf stable You buy a little jar of spices, maybe it costs $3 or $4, depending on the variety. It can last for a long time. It can flavor so many meals. So if you just gradually collect this this collection of spices and herbs, it can really add so much flavor to your meals, as well as health, because these are packed with antioxidant and anti-inflammatory compounds. So things like turmeric, that's one of my favorites. I like to add it to curries, or I make my own cashew cheese and add a little bit of turmeric or scrambled tofu. Um, I Things like cumin. Cumin adds a really nice flavor profile. Cilantro, basil, cinnamon. I mean, you could just go on and on. I think if people could start collecting spices to have them on hand, and what I say is, don't just use a pinch, use a lot. Don't be afraid to be heavy with your hand when it comes to spices. Also, growing some fresh culinary herbs like basil. When the weather starts warming up, dill is one that likes milder climates. You could grow parsley, oregano. There's so many herbs that you can grow, fresh green herbs to add to your dishes.
That's another good one for the balcony garden as well. You mentioned tofu, so there is a bit of a controversy around soy as well. I think there has been some meat dairy industry funded studies discrediting tofu, but as far as I understand, the actual scientific research comes out in favor of soy-based products. Am I correct on
That's
that?
right.
Mhm.
Yeah, I clear up a lot of confusions on that all the time. There's been so much negative buzz on soy foods, but actually soy foods have been used for hundreds of years. They're traditional foods in Asian diets, and we know that uh, Asian diets are linked with health benefits. So they have lower risks in these traditional diets that eat a lot of soy, such as Japan, for example. They eat a lot of soy foods. They have much lower risks of things like breast cancer and different types of cancer than we do in the United States. So that's one hint. But these aren't just foods that were developed recently. They've stood the test of time. They're part of traditional diets, and they're very healthy. They have a high quality protein. They have antioxidant compounds, vitamins, minerals. So I recommend soy foods in the diet. I eat them every day. So the research shows that moderate consumption, which would be considered 1, 2, 3 servings a day, um, is does not pose any health risk. No increased risk of cancer, no feminization of men, no increased risk of thyroid issues, and the things that you've heard about. It's safe if you consume it in moderate amounts. And I like to recommend whole soy foods, things like tofu, edamame, tempeh, soy milk, compared to like isolated proteins. Like if you're having like a soy powder in your smoothie, you could be getting a lot more soy. It's more isolated. So there's really no risk involved in even people who've had breast cancer. There's no increased risk. So now you have all the major health organizations like the American Institute for Cancer Research saying soy is safe. And the research even shows that it could probably protect you. It's not only safe, it probably protects you. So there's really no evidence that we should be avoiding soy. I mean, I know that there's been a lot of negative because one thing is that soy gets confused. The soy that's grown for feeding animals gets confused with the soy that's grown for food. So those are two types of soy. The soy that's in the food system, the GMO soy that's going to animal feed, is a different variety of soy than what's used for soy milk and tofu, because I've talked to a lot of farmers about this. It's in order to make tofu and soy milk, it has to be the most beautiful soybean, because you don't want any little hint of off color. It has to be a different variety than the one that would just be used. It does for feeding animals. So when you look at what's going on in the Amazon with deforestation to grow soy, that is for animal feed. So I think soy gets wrapped up in that conversation. The amount of soy that's going to feed people is such a tiny amount, which is very sad. It's all going to feed animals, not all, but the lion's share.
Yeah, the amount of the Earth's land that's used to grow food to feed to animals is huge. You know, as the slaughterhouses are closing, hopefully for good, I think, and we can repurpose those workers, retrain them into, I mean, there's got to be a million jobs that are more enjoyable than processing dead animals every day, I would think. And then we're going to be liberating the land and liberating the animals, and the animals then can go to farm sanctuaries. So you have traveled around the world. I'm so jealous, and gone to all these beautiful places and eaten this wonderful food in Italy. And you visit farm sanctuaries. I ride a bicycle. I don't have a car, and I support the local farm sanctuaries, but of course they're far away. I mean, I'd need a car or a friend with a car, and I just haven't managed to get to one yet. But I look at them online, and I just think that is what animals should be doing, is living these wonderful lives that they're meant to live. And so the farms, the animals that have been bred into existence for the purpose of food, as I mentioned, I think it's 64 billion a year. Now, as the slaughterhouses are shutting down, those animals are going to need a place to go, ideally, if they could get liberated. What is a farm sanctuary like? What goes on there?
Yeah, I love farm sanctuaries. That they inspire me so much. And sometimes people say, "Well, what's the deal with farm sanctuaries? You can't save them all." But it's just an example. There's a farm sanctuary outside of Los Angeles, and in big urban cities, there people may have never gotten to see what it's like for animals living on a farm, or you've never gotten up close to a cow or a pig or something like that. So I think in some ways, farm sanctuaries serve many purposes. Of course, they rescue animals, but they're also this kind of lesson for us to learn about what life is like for animals and agriculture. And it's very inspiring when you learn about the stories behind these farm sanctuaries, and the rescue stories. It just really is fascinating to me, and they love to have visitors. So if you check out in your community, if you check out where there are any farm sanctuaries and find out their visitation days, it'll be an interesting experience for you. um, so I've tried to, whenever I go traveling, I've tried to make it a point to find a farm sanctuary. Obviously, I haven't done it enough, but there are little ones all over the place. So, if you just do some research, you can find some in your community. For example, this one family I met in Spokane, Washington, that they basically dedicated their retirement to their farm sanctuary, and they just made it into this. I mean, they could just have rested easy on their retirement, but this is their reason for living. They bought property, to have a lot of room for animals. And now they're in this loop where they're constantly connecting with animals that need rescuing. And now they've started up a whole nonprofit. They have volunteers. They help kids spend time and learn and spend time with the farm animals. And it's just an amazing process, and it's given them a new lease on life. They're getting physical exercise, they're enjoying their retirement. So there's all these great stories. So they all need help too. This is a labor of love. So all of these farm sanctuaries need help and support. So I love to support them in whatever way I can. But basically, these are places where they've rescued animals in all different situations, and each animal has its own story. So, a lot of times these places are contacted, these farm sanctuaries are contacted, and they'll be like, "Oh, we have this cow, a dairy cow that we've had for so long, and we can't keep her anymore, and we don't want her to go, to be slaughtered. Can you take her?" And that's one cow. So there's a story and a story and a story of how these animals find their way to the farm sanctuaries. But it's super inspiring.
Hmm. And also, I think that some of even before the pandemic, some farmers I know are working with Mercy for Animals to do a reformation project where they've decided they don't want to have a barn full of thousands of chickens anymore. And then they're growing mushrooms, for example. So
Mm-hmm.
all those thousands of chickens have to go somewhere. I saw a very disturbing video the other day of, I forget which poultry processor, now that the slaughterhouses are closed, they were burying hundreds,
Yeah.
thousands of chickens alive. I mean, horrifying things going on. So now is really a good time also to investigate the farm sanctuaries and figure out how, you know, if you're going to have a backyard chicken, a rescue chicken is a good place to go for that as well, I think. The other thing that's happening is food banks. There's a lot of fundraising for food banks. There's an increased need for food banks, and I think that's only going to continue into the future. What kind of foods do you suggest that we should be donating to food banks?
Well, I think that right now they could really use whatever donations you can provide, whether it's like a financial contribution or shelf stable. That's always really practical for them. But also, this is an opportunity to be creative. You know, like one of the problems that happened in the United States when the farmers were actually plowing their fields over because they couldn't sell their produce, because produce is so perishable. So you don't have a lot of time to figure out if you have a whole field of something that's mature and you've lost your channel, you don't have a lot of time. And a lot of the farmers didn't have the money to transport. They wanted to get it to the food banks, but they financially had no money because they're on such a tight budget, right? So that's where volunteers could step in and make some new idea, come up with some new ideas, like, okay, I'm a volunteer, can I help you get your produce right now to the food bank? So these are ways that we can all step up and try to figure out what we can do. You might have to invent your own ideas to help connect, because literally the food banks are being stressed like never before. So we need to help them with their supplies of food. And, you know, there's so many things going on. Like, for example, where I live, there's a lot of citrus farms, and almost everybody has a citrus tree or two or three on their property, and they're just falling off the tree right now. So there are actually gleaning organizations where you can call and they will come and glean your tree and donate it to a food bank, all volunteers. And even if you just have time right now, like a lot of people have time, you can volunteer, find ways to volunteer safely to help with food access right now. There's so many ways to help.
Mhm. Yeah, it's really a time for creative solutions. Absolutely. Okay, what else were we going to talk about? There's so much, but I think maybe I hear your phone dinging, so I know you're a busy lady. And I really just would encourage people to go to your site. You have so many recipes, and recipes for all levels of cooks, I think, too, eh?
Yes. Yeah, I try to have easy, accessible recipes. I try to have things on my blog or in my books that you could buy the ingredients at a typical supermarket. I mean, sometimes I have some more unusual things because I love to talk about farmers markets where you have more unusual vegetables, but you'll find a lot of everything. But my main goal with my cooking style is to be plant-based, 100% plant-based, delicious, traditional foods from different cultures. So I think those are some of the things that appeal to people right now. So a lot of times I can take one of my recipes to a potluck where I might be the only plant-based person there, and my dish will be the first one gone. And nobody even notices that, you know, all the carnivores don't even notice that it was plant-based. It just looks good. I will never forget that I talked to a plant-based chef, and he was saying that when you're a chef, the plants are what makes everything beautiful. You know, like that if you're working with meat, it's literally dead on the plate, but there's no color. It's just brown, but it's the plants that bring it to life. So, you know, our foods that we make are so beautiful compared to, you know, some of the other things that people are out there eating.
Also, yeah, I find personally, food used to be a chore for me when I was a meat eater. I was raised, you know, with a standard Canadian diet. and it was always a chore, and the cleanup was always kind of horrible because there was blood and like, and so, but shifting to plant-based, it's wonderful, and I'm not afraid to experiment. So for example, the other day I tried to make some vegan cheese, and I don't have a high-speed blender, so it's okay, but it's really crumbly, so it's not really cheese, it's more of a crumble, but that's okay.
Mhm.
But I feel like
Okay.
experimenting, even if it fails, it's still, it's going to be safe because it's all plants. I don't have to worry so much about food safe type stuff, and even if it's, oh, the spices aren't quite good, but you could, there's really no failure. It's a really good time to experiment.
Exactly. I know I make things all the time that don't turn out quite the way I want, but it's okay. It's just part of the journey. Last night I made this cashew cream, and it wasn't perfect, but it's still so good. I made these veggie tacos, cauliflower tacos, and then I drizzled it with cashew cream. It wasn't my best best cashew cream, but it was still good. So we
Right.
we are lucky that we get to eat so well, right?
Oh my gosh, we are so lucky. And yeah, I think of the people in the refugee camps and all, around the world in crowded conditions in cities, and yeah, counting our blessings wherever we are at this time for sure. And the more we can move to supporting the local farmers, I think, and supporting our own longevity and our own health so that we can stay healthy and combat this disease, I think is another good thing. So Sharon Palmer, thank you so much for taking the time today. And your website is fantastic, as I mentioned, SharonPalmer.com. You have books and all kinds of free information. And what are you doing for the rest of the day today?
Oh, I'm going to have a conference where I'm teaching at Prescott University on sustainable food systems. So I'm having a conference there where we're talking about some new projects that we want to work on in the sustainable food world. So that's something I'm passionate about. I'm working on my new book, which you mentioned. So that's exciting. Constantly thinking about ways to connect people with healthy, sustainable food.
What a great life. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time today.
Thank you.